So please let me know if you're able to hear me. Any one of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. So, so we will just wait for a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. So in the meanwhile, any questions on dimensional analysis? Anybody? No questions? All right. Okay, so let's see. We have 10 people in the class so far. Maybe we'll wait for just a minute or two and then we'll get started. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so anybody has any questions? On our previous lecture? And so what we'll do today is we'll first, just quickly go through those problems that I sent. So there were, I think, 5 or 6 problems. So we'll quickly go through those problems and then we'll get started with, the new topic, open channel flow. All right. So no questions? All right. So let's just get started. I'm going to share my screen and put up those tutorial questions on the screen. So let me try to do that. Share screen. Tutorial 4. Okay. So can you see the screen? The tutorial sheet. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So let's see how many questions there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, only 5. Okay. So I think almost a couple of problems on each topic. Around. Okay. 1 second. People keep coming and I have to go back and admit them into the room. Okay. Yeah. Okay. One more. Okay. So let us quickly go through these problems. So the first one, a pump delivers 1500 liters per minute of water against a pressure rise of 270 kilopascal. If the kinetic and potential energy changes are negligible and the driving motor supplies 9 kilowatt, what is the overall efficiency? Okay. So anybody wants to quickly maybe try to explain how to solve this one? Maybe I can even call out somebody if that's what you want. Let's see. Okay. Nikhil, can you please unmute yourself and maybe try to help us with this?
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. So what is the approach that you should take for this, or you would take for this problem? Yes, Nikhil. So, okay. So do you understand the question?
Not quite. Not correctly.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Say that again.
No, sir.
Okay, your voice is very muffled. I'm not able to understand exactly what you're saying. Okay, so just just quickly tell us how you would approach this problem, and then we'll see if we can move on to somebody else. So what information is available in the problem? Can you at least tell us what is available? What information is available?
Q is available, pressure is available, and power is available.
Okay, so the flow rate is available, the pressure, no, it's not pressure actually, it's pressure difference, pressure rise, and then the power supplied to the motor is available. Okay, yeah, so how would you go about solving this?
Overall efficiency is equals to beta x1, 3 beta centigrade.
What is that? Overall efficiency equal to eta? Yeah.
Hydraulic, volumetric, and
Correct. But we are not able to distinguish between how much is the hydraulic efficiency, how much is the mechanical efficiency, and how much is the volumetric efficiency. The question is only to find out the overall efficiency. Right? So overall efficiency will be what divided by what? If you can, or not WATT, WHAT. What term divided by what term will be the overall efficiency? So the efficiency is a ratio of two terms. So what will be on the numerator and what will be on the denominator is my question.
power by rate
Power by?
Rate of flow.
Power by rate of flow. Okay, so when you say power, which power do you mean? This 9 kilowatt that is given, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so see, the thing is this motor is supplying 9 kilowatts of power. Okay, so the input power is 9 kilowatt. What is actually being gained by the fluid is something else. So basically the efficiency is the power gained by the fluid divided by the power supplied to the motor, right? If I supply 10 and I'm able to transfer, or if I'm able to deliver 8 units, whatever unit is it, if I give 10 units of power to the motor and the water that comes out of the motor has 8 units of power. So that means I have been able to transfer it with an efficiency of 80%, right? I gave 10 and the water has got 8, right? So the numerator will be the power, or sorry, the pressure, power gained by the fluid, and the denominator will be what we supplied. Right? So the denominator is 9, the numerator is the power gained by the fluid. Okay, thanks Nikhil. Now let's try to find somebody else to answer the remaining part of the question. So what goes in the in the numerator? Let's see, who do we call? Vamshi.
Sir, I didn't read it, sir.
What is that?
Sir, I didn't read it.
You did not what?
I didn't study it, sir.
No. You're able to see the problem, right? It's okay if you didn't solve this tutorial problem. But now I'm asking you that we've already come to a situation where we have, okay, so let me maybe write on the, so I'm saying efficiency eta equal to input power, sorry, not input power, power gained by fluid divided by input power. Okay. So input power is 9 kilowatt. We want to find out what the power gained by the fluid is. How will we do that given the information? That's the question. So in this equation, eta equal to power gained by fluid divided by input power. Input power is known. We have to find out power gained by the fluid, and then that will give us eta. So right now eta is unknown. If we can somehow find out what that numerator is, power gained by the fluid is, then the problem is solved. So do you remember what the formula for power is? Power equal to what? We've done this so many times now.
We can multiply the pressure and flow rate.
One second. Multiple people are talking.
Q, H, Q.
Vamshi first, then we'll go to somebody else. Vamshi, yes.
Sir, what's
Is that?
power gained by fluid?
I'm not able to hear you clearly. All right. Okay. So who was that? Sindhuja?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead. What were you saying?
We can multiply the pressure and flow rate.
You can multiply pressure and flow rate. So are you saying it is Q into delta P? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you think this will give us power?
The head developed should be capable of. It should be capable of going against the pressure. That's it. In this case.
No. Wait a second. Okay. So what?
So the delta P by rho G will be head
H.
developed by the pump.
Okay. Okay. So you're saying delta P is simply, the head developed by the pump. Okay. So you're saying head developed by the pump is equal to delta P divided by rho into G. Okay. So that is giving you H, let us say. Okay. So then if this is the head developed by the pump, okay, maybe I'll put it somewhere here. Okay. So power is, okay. Let's just remember what the formula is. Power is rho into G into Q into H. Okay. So Q is given 1500 liters per minute. H is simply this delta P divided by rho G. And since here again I have rho G into Q into delta P divided by rho G. So what Sindhuja is saying is this rho and G will get cancelled out. You can simply do Q into delta P. That will give you the power gained by the fluid. Is that okay? Right? So it's a fairly straightforward problem. What it's telling you is that the pressure rises so and so. Okay. If the kinetic and potential energy changes are negligible. Okay. The reason that piece of information is given is because in principle, this head developed by the pump, okay, H is actually P2 minus P1 divided by rho into G, plus V2 square minus V1 square by 2G, plus Z2 minus Z1. This is the actual equation for the head developed by the pump. P2 minus P1 by rho G plus V2 square minus V1 square by 2G plus Z2 minus Z1. All right. So the problem statement is saying if the kinetic energy change is negligible, which means this V2 square minus V1 square is negligible. So that becomes 0. And potential energy changes are negligible, which means Z2 minus Z1 is negligible, right? So therefore you get rid of these two terms. Z2 minus Z1 goes away. V2 square minus V1 square by 2G term goes away. So you are left with this H equal to P2 minus P1 by rho G. So therefore you can use that in this equation, solve for the power, and then put that back into the equation. Eta efficiency equal to power gained by the fluid divided by input power, and that will give you the efficiency. Is that okay? Any questions? All right. Okay. Let's quickly go on to the next one. Okay. In a test of the pump in figure 1, the data are as follows. P1 equal to 100 millimeters of mercury vacuum. P2 equal to 500 millimeters of mercury gauge. D1 equal to 12 centimeters. D2 equal to 5 centimeters. And the flow rate of the oil is 11.36 liters per second. Estimate A, the head developed by the pump, and B, the input power at 75% efficiency. Use specific gravity of mercury equal to 13.6 and of the oil equal to 0.91. Okay, so this is almost the same as the previous problem, except that instead of giving you the pressure rise, the pressure at points 1 and 2 is given. The difference in elevation between points 1 and 2 is given, Z1 and Z2, 65 centimeters. And then the diameter of this pipe and this pipe is given. So therefore, if you know the flow rate, you can solve for V1 and V2, correct? If I know the diameter of the pipe here and I know the flow rate, I can convert that into V1. If I know the diameter here and I know the flow rate, I can convert that to V2. So V2 square minus V1 square by 2G, you can find out. The data is available. Z2 minus Z1, you can find out. That information is also given. P2 minus P1. Now here is the important part here. P2 minus P1 is given in terms of millimeters of mercury. Okay. And it is given as a vacuum pressure and as a gauge pressure. Okay. Now what does vacuum pressure mean and what does gauge pressure mean? Anybody wants to answer that? Okay, let's see. Who can? Anjana. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay. Yes. Yeah. So P1 and P2 is given in this problem, right? So I have 100 mm of mercury vacuum and P2 is 500 mm of mercury in gauge pressure. Okay. So how would you go about this? Can you help us?
P2 is it's not the actual pressure. Like it's the difference of actual. I mean, gauge pressure. They given gauge pressure. Also.
Yeah. So absolute pressure and gauge pressure, what is the relationship?
Absolute pressure is the pressure when we consider atmospheric pressure.
Okay.
Whereas gauge pressure we consider atmospheric, like P actual minus P atmospheric equals to
Fair
P
enough.
gauge.
Fair enough. Okay. So gauge pressure is 500 millimeters of mercury above atmospheric pressure. Okay. Now tell us about P1. What does vacuum mean? And what do you expect the pressure at the inlet to the pump to be with respect to atmospheric pressure? Will it be equal to atmospheric pressure? Will it be above atmospheric pressure? Will it be below atmospheric pressure?
Below atmospheric pressure.
Below atmospheric pressure. So that's what vacuum means, right? So P1 equal to 100 mm of mercury. Vacuum means that it is actually 100 mm of mercury below atmospheric pressure, right? Atmospheric pressure is whatever 1.01 into 10 power 3 kilopascal, Pascal or whatever it is, or 101.3, sorry. So this is the pressure on the inlet side of the pump is 100 mm of mercury below atmospheric pressure. The pressure on the outlet, the delivery side of the pump is 500 mm of mercury above atmospheric pressure, right? So the difference in the pressures between points 2 and point 1 is basically 600 millimeters of mercury, right? P2 is 500 above atmospheric, P1 is 100 mm below atmospheric pressure. So the difference in P2 and P1 is 500 minus 100, right? Sorry, minus of minus 100. 500 minus 100. So it is actually 600 millimeters of mercury is the pressure difference between point 1 and 2, right? So just like we solved in the previous problem, it was told to us that kinetic and potential energy changes are negligible. In this problem, you will include that also in computing the head developed by the pump. So the head developed by the pump will be, okay, let me write it again over here. So the head developed by the pump equal to P2 minus P1 divided by rho G plus V2 square minus V1 square by 2G plus Z2 minus Z1, right? Everything is given to you. The flow rate is known and the diameters at 1 and 2 are known. So therefore V2 and V1 you can easily find out, not a problem. Z2, Z1, the elevation difference is given 65 centimeters. So Z2 minus Z1 is 65 centimeters. Just now we have found out what P2 minus P1 is, right? But now here you have to be a little bit careful, right? You have to convert it to meters equivalent for this of this oil, right? This P2 minus P1 is 100 mm of mercury, right? Is that clear? So if it is 600 mm of mercury, then how many meters of this oil will it be? That's what you need to find out. Is that clear? Okay, so
Yes.
okay, I'll put it like this. If it is 600 mm of mercury, how many mm of water will it be? Can anybody answer that? Okay, I'm gonna start calling out people. Otherwise, I think people just come in and just Bittu. Yeah, so you're unmuted now. So
Yes, sir.
if P2 minus P1 is 600 millimeters of mercury, how many millimeters of water will it be? 600 multiplied by what?
726.
No. So that 760 millimeters of mercury is one atmospheric, one unit of atmospheric pressure. Right. So okay. So you're going in kind of the right direction, but you have to think a little bit more about this, right? So if I have 600 millimeters of mercury as the difference in pressure between points 2 and 1, what is the equivalent height? If instead of mercury, if I had placed water in that manometer, how much will the height difference be, is my question. Remember, we discussed about when we are talking about manometers that sometimes we use mercury as the manometer fluid, because otherwise you will need a manometer of a tremendous height.
Rho GH.
Rho GH, correct. So the question I'm asking is, if I use mercury in the manometer, I get a difference of 600 mm.
Yeah.
If I use water instead of mercury, how much difference will I get? Will I get the same 600 mm? Will I get more than that? Will I get less than that?
600 into 13.6.
Exactly. Okay. So is that clear to everybody else? So here, if I use mercury, I will get 600 mm of difference in pressure between points 2 and 1. If I use water, I will get 600 multiplied by 13.6. If I use this particular oil, what should I get? 600 into 13.6, then what? This oil has got a density that is lower than that of water. Right?
1 by 0.9.
1 by 0.91, correct. Right? So it will be 600 multiplied by 13.6 divided by 0.91. Okay, so this P2 minus P1 by rho G, if you can also write this as, maybe I'll try to write it a little bit differently. I will write it as H equal to delta H. Okay, instead of writing it as rho G and getting confused with what rho to use, just directly convert it into a delta H, which means the difference in height if I had used oil in those 2 manometers. Plus V2 square by 2G, I'll just leave that alone. Okay, plus whatever, blah, 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 plus blah, blah, blah. Same thing as before. V2 square minus V1 square by 2G plus Z2 minus Z1. This del H is simply 600 mm of mercury or 600 mm multiplied by 13.6. So those many mm of water, then if I divide it by 0.91, these many mm of that oil will be the pressure difference between points 2 and 1, right? And then of course you have to convert this to meters, because this equation, the equation over here, the first equation, H equal to P2 minus P1 by rho G, this one expects all the units to be in meters. So you have to divide this whole thing by 1000. I think you will get okay, 600 into 13.6 divided by 0.91. The whole thing divided by 1000 will give it to you in terms of meters. Okay, so then you got everything you need to obtain H, capital H. Once you have capital H, that is your first part of the problem. The head developed by the pump will be whatever you solve for this capital H. After putting in all the appropriate terms in this equation, you will get capital H. Then the next question is the input power at 75% efficiency. The previous problem, input power was given to you and you are asked to find efficiency. Here, you are asked to find the input power given that the efficiency is 75%. So it's the same thing, right? So eta equal to 0.75. So in other words, you will write this equation as 0.75 equal to rho into G into Q into H divided by input power, right? You know rho. So here this rho will be the density of the oil times G. You know that Q is given 11.36 liters per second. Remember, this equation expects everything to be in SI units. So you have to convert this to meter cube per second. Okay, even in this V2 square minus V1 square, V2 and V1 are meters per second in units of meters per second. So you'll have to convert this to meter cube per second and then convert it to meters per second when you convert it to V2 and V1, right? So Q will be in meters per second and H will be, after you solve this equation, you will get H, right? Sorry, when you solve this equation. So rho is known, G is known, Q is known, H is known. The efficiency is 75%, so you can solve for input power. Very, very straightforward problem. Okay, any questions on this? Anybody? All right. Okay. So let us move on. Let's go to the third problem. Okay. So this one is actually about open channel flow, but this is a dimensional analysis problem. So we can use dimensional analysis to solve a open channel problem as well. Okay. Okay. A V notch is used to measure the flow across the channel. The flow rate Q depends only on the angle of the notch theta, acceleration due to gravity G, and the height H of the upstream water surface above the notch vertex. Okay, so I'll just draw a quick figure so that you understand what this thing is. So V notch is essentially something like this. Okay. Okay, so imagine that there is a river flowing perpendicular to this shape that I've drawn. Okay, so I will create an obstruction in the path of the river that looks like this. Okay, this is called a V notch. So here this entire portion, okay, maybe, okay, I don't, so this entire portion is a solid metal surface, okay. So the water can only flow through, so the water will be over here. Okay, can you imagine this? Imagine a metal, a rectangular plate of metal, for example, with a V-shaped notch. This is a notch, okay? And this I'm placing as an obstruction in the path of the river, okay? So imagine that the flow is happening perpendicular to the screen, okay? And the flow is coming out of the screen. All right. So here I have this V notch placed in the path of the river, okay? So the flow rate Q that comes through this depends on the angle of the notch. Okay, so if I know this angle theta, okay, acceleration due to gravity g, and the height h of the upstream water surface above the notch vertex. If I know this height, okay, this height of water is let us say it's capital H. Okay, so what the equation, if I convert this entire thing into an equation, it's basically Q, the flow rate, is a function of theta, the acceleration due to gravity g, and the height of the water surface above the notch vertex h. Okay, so I've converted that first sentence into a mathematical statement: Q equal to F times theta comma g comma h. Okay, find the dimensionless correlation for the flow rate through the notch. Okay, so I want you to think back about the various steps that we have in this dimensional analysis problem. Can anybody tell me what small n in this problem is? Okay, I'm going to call out somebody. Okay, people have started leaving the class, looks like. They're afraid of that I might call them or something. I don't know. Let's see. Yashwanti. Yes. So can you tell us what small n in this problem will be?
4.
4. Okay. Does everybody agree with that?
Number of variables.
Yeah. The total number of variables are Q, theta, G, and H. So that's 4. Right? Okay. Thank you. So maybe one more question for you. Can you tell us what are the dimensions involved in this problem?
Great. M, L, and
Sir, hello?
theta.
Yeah, one second. Let her finish. So are you sure? Do we have M in this? What are the units of flow rate Q?
It's volume by time. So
Volume by time. So that's L cube T
L
minus
power
1.
minus 3. Yes.
L power 3 T power minus 1.
3 T minus 1.
Okay. G
So L,
is
T and meter per second square. So L T power minus 2.
right. So the dimensions involved in this problem are L and T. Okay, only L and T. M is not involved in this. Okay,
And
was it
T.
Chakra?
Okay, sir.
What is that? And theta
L
has
and
no
T, sir.
dimensions, right?
No dimensions, yes. Sir.
Theta has no dimensions. Was it okay? Somebody had a question. Chakra there maybe?
Sir, we can solve analytically now this question.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
We can solve this
Then-
analytically. I agree with you. Okay,
Then
but
why are we using dimensional?
otherwise, no. See, the thing is this: even whatever we solved in class on that other day, those are things that we can solve analytically. Only then you are able to compare what you get with dimensional analysis to the analytical solution, and then say, yeah, it makes sense. It's correct. So when you apply it to a problem where you don't know the analytical solution, then you can be assured that dimensional analysis is giving you the right, it's guiding you in the right direction. Okay. We are not in this class, at least, we are not actually doing, any experiment where we don't know the actual relationship between the input variable and the output variable, right? So this is to show you how to use dimensional analysis. Okay. So that when you actually go to do an experiment where you don't know the relationship, you may be able to do it correctly. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. Okay. So the dimensions involved in this problem are L and T, right? So which means small j is 2. Okay. Correct. Because you just have to count the number of dimensions that are available in the problem. So in this case, it's only L and T. Q is L cube T minus 1. Theta has no dimension. G is LT minus 2. H is L, right? So we need to, so how many pi terms are required?
2.
2, right? K,
N minus
which is n minus j. sorry, n minus j is 2. So you need 2 pi terms and 2 repeating variables, right? So now if you look at the options available to you, you can pick g and h as the repeating variables, because rule number 1, you can't pick the original variable, so you can't pick q. Rule number 2, the variables that you pick have to cover all the dimensions available. Theta doesn't have any dimensions, so you are left with only these two, so you have to pick them. So there's no other option. So the repeating variables are g and h. Small g, I mean acceleration due to gravity, and the h, the height of the upstream water surface above the notch vertex, right? So then you will go through the steps, and then you will solve it. You will get the 2 pi terms. Yes, somebody, I think I had a
Yeah,
question.
so this is Aditya.
Yes.
Sir, we can also take theta and g also, no? Because g will contain all the dimensions that are involved. I mean, G-
Sure. Okay, what I would strongly suggest is that somebody actually does this problem, and then once you do it, you will understand what will happen when you take. You can take theta and g, sure, no problem.
Okay, sir.
Right? Go ahead and take theta and g. You will see what happens. There's no possible combination in which theta and g can have power equal to 0. Do you agree with me?
Yes.
Right? So anyway, so see, the objective is we're not going to solve the entire problem here. So you have to go through the problem and see what you get. Okay. So then you will solve for the 2 pi terms, and then you will equate the 2 pi terms, pi 1 equal to some function of pi 2. Okay. So that's problem number 3. Let's go to the 4th one. When a sphere falls slowly in a highly viscous fluid, the settling velocity Vs is known to be a function of the sphere diameter d, the fluid viscosity mu, and the difference between the specific weights of the sphere and the fluid delta gamma. Find a dimensionless relationship between the variables. Okay. So this is, I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember Stokes velocity or terminal velocity, something like that? Have you had that in high school physics or something like that?
Yes, you will get 6 names or something.
What is that? You will get what?
6, you will get 6 number also in that formula.
6 pi eta RB.
Okay, I can't hear you clearly. I think are you saying something?
I think it was 6 pi eta RB.
6 pi eta RV. I honestly don't remember it to that extent. I think it will look something like I don't remember it either. So I think the actual expression is, I think, something like this: V equal to rho of that solid minus rho of the fluid times G, which is what this delta gamma is, right? Delta gamma is the difference in specific weights, which is the same as rho S minus rho F into G. I think mu will be in the denominator. I don't remember, honestly. Okay. So if this again is a simple problem. I don't want to write something incorrect. Okay. I don't remember it, to be honest. So V suffix S equal to some function of the diameter D. I think it will be D cube, I think. Because D cube will be the weight, right? Because when it settling velocity is that velocity. I don't know if you remember this from your high school physics or whatever. Settling velocity is when the what is that? The drag force and the weight of the body acting downwards are completely in balance. So therefore, you get some uniform settling velocity. It's called the terminal velocity, right? Have you seen that movie? There's a movie called Terminal Velocity or something like that. So when a particle falls, so when a raindrop falls, for example, from the sky, right? Initially, it'll accelerate as it approaches the earth, right? Because it is falling under the influence of gravity. But eventually, after it has attained some certain velocity, there will be a drag force, a frictional force resisting the raindrop falling downwards, and there will be the weight of the raindrop acting, the frictional force will be acting upwards as the raindrop falls downwards. The weight of the particle is acting downwards, and the force, the resistance, the frictional resistance is acting upwards. So at some point, these two forces will get balanced, and beyond that, the particle can no longer accelerate. So it will fall with uniform velocity. That is called terminal velocity. Okay. So it depends on the weight of the particle. So which will depend on d cube, right? Because the diameter of the volume of that spherical particle is proportional to d cubed, right? And then there's the difference between the specific weights, which is the difference in the density between the fluid in which it is falling and the density of the sphere itself. Okay. So I want you to go ahead and solve it. Okay. So d, mu, and delta gamma. Okay. So here again, you'll count the number of variables n, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you'll count the number of dimensions, right? Vs is Lt minus 1, d is L, mu is ml minus 1, t minus 1. Delta gamma, you'll have to find it out. What is it? Newton per meter cube, right? So you can find out what delta gamma is. So here I think it will be n will be equal to 3 because it will have m, l, and t. And then you know j. J is, what is j? J will be 3. Sorry, n is 4. J is 3. I'm sorry. N is 4. J is 3. So you will need one pi term. So just go ahead and solve it. You will be able to find out what the dimensionless relationship is. Okay. So I'll leave it to you. But if I remember correctly, it will be something to do with d cubed. D cubed, and then mu I think will be in the denominator, and delta gamma will be in the numerator. Okay. And if you go back to your high school physics, I think you may remember Stokes' law or something like that. It's called Stokes velocity. Just go back and check with your, once you get the expression, you will be able to compare it to what you've already learned. Okay. So any questions on this?
No, sir.
All right. Okay. So let's quickly go to the last one. Find the loops in the flow given the inflows and outflows. The pipes are all 25 centimeter cast iron, F equal to 0.02. Okay. So this is a simple pipe network problem. So we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pipes. The lengths of all the pipes are given, right? So I have 200 meters is the horizontal pipe, and this vertical, I mean, when I say horizontal vertical, I mean in this figure. Okay. So this horizontal distance is 200 meters. This distance is 100 meters. And the diagonal, you can simply just, estimate the length of the diagonal. It's fairly straightforward. Then you know the inflows at these different vertices. Let us say it's A, B, C, D. I know the inflow at A, the outflow at B, outflow at C, and the inflow at D. So you can, you know the inflows and outflows at these junctions. Then what you do is you first guess what the flow rates in the different pipes and their flow directions will be, right? So you'll make a guess. So if 1 cubic meter per second is coming into this junction, then what will be the flow in this pipe? What will be the flow in this pipe? What will be the flow in this pipe? You have to make a guess. Make sure that sigma q at every junction is 0, and then break up the entire network into loops. How many loops does this network have?
3.
3 loops.
2.
2
loops, right? So I have, let us say you call this A, B, C. If this is loop 1, and then I also have A, C, D, A. This is loop 2, right? So I have loop 1 and loop 2. So initially, before you break it up into loops, you'll guess all the flow rates and directions in all the pipes. So I think in this particular case, you'll have to make 2 guesses, right? If you don't have this diagonal pipe, you only have to make 1 guess. Then you can find out what the flow rates in all the other pipes are. But because there is an additional pipe, you'll have to make 2 guesses, and then you can find out the flow rates in all the pipes. So that initial guess is a completely guesswork, right? You can make any guess you want, but of course you have to be a little bit reasonable and guess something close to 1 cubic meter per second, something between 0.5 and 1, right? Somewhere there you can make a guess. You make 2 guesses and then you can go about solving for the flow rates in all the pipes, ensuring that sigma q is 0 at all the junctions, right? Then you break it up into 2 loops, solve the first loop, get the delta correction, and apply the correction in all the pipes in that loop, in loop 1. Then solve for loop 2, making sure that you use the most recent value of the flow rate in the common pipe, right? So let us say this diagonal pipe is pipe 5. Okay, after you solve loop 1, you will get a correction for loop 1. You apply that correction, you will get a corrected flow rate in loop 5. Use that corrected flow rate when you solve for loop 2. Okay, so you will solve for loop 2, then you will get another correction. You apply that correction again to loop 5. Sorry, loop 2, pipe 5. So pipe 5 will get corrected twice. Okay, so I think all of you know this procedure, but I strongly urge you to go through this problem. Maybe, set up a simple Excel file where you can do this, right? You do one iteration by hand and then do the remaining iterations in an Excel file. Okay, so that you can very quickly do this and find out what the flow rates in all the pipes are. Okay, what I'll do is I'll give you a couple of days. Maybe on Friday when we meet again, I will give you the answers for this particular one, so that you all know how to go about this and whether whatever you have done is correct or not. When do you stop iterating? When will you stop iterating when you do this iterative process? When will you stop iterating? Anybody?
When the head loss sums up to 0.
When the head loss sums up to 0, or when delta q sums up to delta q almost approaches 0, right? So in both the loops, you should get the head loss around the loop to be equal to 0 or very close to 0. You'll never actually get 0. You will get closer and closer to 0, right? So when the summation of delta h's around the loop become equal to 0, that is when you can say that the iteration process has converged and you can stop the solution. Okay, so on Friday when we meet, I hope all of you have solved it. I won't reveal the answers until we discuss the problem, and then everybody has got some answers. So I can ask anybody. So please do make sure that you've solved it, and you have the answers ready when you come on Friday. Okay. Any questions on this?
No.
Okay, so let's quickly get on to our. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this, and then I'm going to go to the whiteboard. Okay, so you can see the whiteboard.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Good. So today we are going to. Can you see at the very top? Is the text visible, or is there any obstruction to the text? Okay, maybe I'll just put it over here. Open channel flow. So we are going to talk about open channel flows. All right. So when I say the very term open channel flows, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What do you think it means? Anybody? So far, we have spoken about pipe flows, right? In that context, when I say pipe flow and then now I'm saying open channel flow, what do you think is the immediate distinction that you can think of between open channel flow and pipe flow? Anybody?
Pipe is not completely filled with water.
What is that?
The pipe is not completely filled with water. It's a bit open.
In the case of pipe flow, are you saying, are you talking about open channel flow?
Open channel flows.
The pipe is not completely filled with water. Okay, what does that mean?
So the water is flowing in the pipe, but it's not completely filling the pipe. It's just flowing.
I understand. I understood what you're saying. What I'm saying is, so that is a kind of what you're giving me is an example of an open channel flow. But what about a river or a drain or a even on the road, sometimes you can see along the side of the road there'll be a gutter or something like that. Is that also an open channel flow?
Quite possibly so.
Quite possibly. Okay. So let us, the simplest definition that we can come up with to say what open channel flow is, basically a flow in which there is a free surface. There is a free surface. Okay. Which means that the fluid has got a surface. In the case of pipe flow, when we discuss pipe flow, the pipe is completely filled with the fluid. Okay. So the pipe is constrained within the fluid. Okay. But in the case of open channel flow, it is any kind of flow. It could be inside a pipe also, but in which there must be a free surface. Okay. So the fluid is, that is the first point. And then the thing is, the fluid is exposed to the atmosphere. So that is the fundamental difference between pipe flow and open channel flow. Number one is that the flow in which the fluid has got a free surface. Okay. And then because it has a free surface, it is exposed to atmospheric pressure, or I'll write it as atmospheric pressure instead of atmosphere. Okay. All right. So now, suppose I ask you between open channel flow and pipe flow. Okay. In the case of pipe flow, I can very easily say that the flow is happening in the direction of declining energy, total energy, right? In the case of a pipe flow, the pipe may be horizontal, it may be vertical, it may be slanting, whatever it is, right? But if I pick any 2 points along that pipe, in whatever direction that pipe may be, right? If I write the total energy at point 1 and point 2, right? The flow will always be from that point where the total energy is higher to a point where the total energy is lower. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So then, what is driving the force in the case of pipe flows, and what is driving the force in the case of open channel flows? For the sake of simplicity, let us assume that the cross-sectional area is not varying in the direction of flow. Okay. And the flow rate is uniform, or the steady flow rate. Okay. Which means the velocity at those two cross sections, whether it is a pipe or an open channel, is the same. Correct? If the flow rate is steady and the cross sectional area is not changing, whether it is pipe or open channel. Okay. If the cross sectional area is not changing, then naturally V1 and V2 are not changing. So V1 square by 2G and V2 square by 2G are also not changing. Right? So I'm going to write Bernoulli. P1 by gamma plus V1 square by 2G by 2G.
Sir,
yes.
in open channel flow, pressure difference is not going to make any difference, because it is connected to atmospheric pressure everywhere. No?
Okay. Okay. So let us learn that from this equation. Okay. Okay. I've written down this equation. Let us assume that this is no. Let us not assume. We know that this is applicable to both open channel flow and pipe flow. Okay. For the time being, let us assume that I have a pipe of uniform diameter and I have an open channel of uniform cross section, right? And if the flow rate is steady, then V1 square by 2G and V2 square by 2G are no longer important, right? So this equation will simply become this: P1 by gamma plus Z1 equal to P2 by gamma plus Z2. right? That's what Bernoulli tells us. If V1 square, if V1 and V2 are the same, then this is what Bernoulli equation will look like, right? Suppose I have a pipe in which Z1 is greater than Z2. Now there are only three possibilities, right? Either Z1 is equal to Z2, or Z1 is less than Z2, or Z1 is greater than Z2, right? Between these 2 points in the flow, where the flow is taking place, either Z1 is greater than Z2, or Z1 is equal to Z2, or Z1 is less than Z2. Correct? If Z1 is equal to Z2, okay, in fact, we should also write this equation a little bit carefully. It should be plus HF, right? Because there are always frictional losses. We know that. If the flow is from 1 to 2, then HF should be added to the right hand side, right? So now in these three cases, can anybody tell me what is the role of P1 and P2? Case 1, Z1 equal to Z2. Okay. What is the relationship between P1 and P2? Which is greater? Come on, this is easy, quickly.
P1.
P1 greater than P2, correct? Okay, case 2. Z1 less than Z2.
P1 is greater than P2. P1 is greater.
Louder, I can't hear you.
P1 is greater than P2.
P1 is greater than P2. What about this one? Z1 greater than Z2. Then
We cannot say.
we cannot say, right? But in general, if Z1 is greater than Z2, it is difficult to say, but it is possible that, P1 can be greater than P2, it can be equal to P2, it can also be less than P2. It's possible, not impossible. Okay, but in these three cases, if you remember, what was HGL? Do you remember HGL? What is HGL? Do you remember that?
Hydraulic grade line.
Hydraulic grade line, right? So basically, the hydraulic grade line always slopes in the direction of flow. It will be higher from where, at the point from where the flow, if the flow is going from 1 to 2, HGL at point 1 has to be greater than HGL at point 2, right? This is so obvious, right? Correct. So predominantly, HGL at 1 is greater than HGL at 2. So this is the driving case, this is what drives the flow. Okay, so I can say in pipe flow, or rather in pipes, flow is predominantly driven by pressure gradient. Agreed? Right? Predominantly it is driven by pressure gradient. I have a higher pressure here, I have a lower pressure here. I'm moving the fluid between these 2 points, and that is what this pressure is, what is driving the flow. Okay, but in the case of open channel flow, let us see what this equation becomes. In open channels, P1 by gamma both points are exposed to atmosphere. So what happens to P1 by gamma and P2 by gamma? Both P1 and P2, see, by the very definition of open channel flow, we have said that it is a flow in which there is a free surface and in which the fluid is exposed to atmospheric pressure, right? So the entire fluid is exposed to atmospheric pressure. So therefore P1 by gamma and P2 by gamma are necessarily equal to atmospheric pressure. So they both go away, right? So you are left with Z1 equal to Z2 plus HF, correct? Of course, I've made an assumption that, you know, V1 and V2 are the same, right? Correct. So now what is driving the flow?
Gravity.
Thank you. In open channels, flow is driven by gravity. Okay, there may be, you know, exceptions here and there. For some short distance, you may be able to you know, drive open channel flow even though there is, you know, Z2 is greater than Z1, but you cannot sustain that for more than a few meters or something, right? You can't have for kilometers and kilometers flow going against gravity, right? Open
Sir,
channel, yes.
in which case we will get against gravity?
So very, see, suppose let us say you have to have a canal delivering water from I mean, you know this, right? That Krishna water is being supplied to Chennai city. Do you know that?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. So you guys all need to read the newspaper. You will, every year in June, July, you will see Krishna water released. It will reach Chennai in 2 days, 3 days, something like that. You will see messages in the newspaper. Please read the newspaper. Okay. So the river Krishna water is supplied to the city of Chennai. Okay. And that canal actually goes past Kalahasti near our campus. 20 kilometers from our campus is where that canal goes. Okay. So there is a canal that is going all the way from the river Krishna to the city of Chennai, where that water reaches and then it's used to supply water to the people living in Chennai. Okay. So imagine that I have got a canal that is running for so many kilometers, right? It's hundreds of kilometers from the Krishna river all the way to Chennai. Naturally, this flow can only happen as long as there is a gradient between this Krishna river and Chennai city, right? So when you lay a long canal, so this is an artificial man-made canal. Okay, so if you visit near Kalahasti, you will see a trapezoidal shaped canal section in which water is flowing. It flows about 6 to 7 months of a year. Rest of the time it's dry. Okay, so this canal is constructed by us. Okay, so we can, because it's constructed by us, we can always ensure that, you know, it's flowing in the direction in which you intend it to go. So the elevation difference will always be there. But sometimes it is not possible to have, you know, continuously the gradient pointing in the same direction of flow. Sometimes you may have to, here and there, for some short distance, maybe a few meters, in order to save some expenses, you may be able to have a, you know, slightly go against gravity, but not for a long distance. You can't sustain it for long distance. In order to save some expense, you may be able to go against gravity for some short distance and then continue going along with gravity, so that gravity takes it. Okay. Anyway, so the point is that open channel flow is essentially a flow in which there is a free surface, in which the fluid is exposed to atmosphere, and by a simple application of Bernoulli's equation, we have seen that open channel flow is simply driven by gravity, except for very rare cases for short distances where you may have, you know, flow against gravity. Okay, but that is not, it's not possible to, you know, achieve all the time. So that is, and that is also only done mostly, you know, by human intervention, right, where we know what we are doing. But if you look at nature, you know, there's so many rivers, so many streams. All of these open channels are those where nature has by itself found a path such that the river is flowing automatically along, you know, along the direction of declining elevation, right? So the river typically if you look at a watershed, it'll always be the lowest point in the watershed will be where the water will collect, right? So even when you have, within the city, there may be some areas which are low-lying areas. There may be some areas which are on a slope or something like that. You will always notice that the places that will get flooded after a rainfall event will be the low-lying areas, right? So that is because naturally water flows in, along with, it's driven by gravity, and it flows to the low-lying areas. And in the low-lying area, typically that is where you will see the, the natural rivers and the streams. All of those will be in the low-lying areas, right? Because nature intends it to be that way. Without doing anything, gravity itself will take the flow in the direction of gravitational gradient. Okay. Any questions on this?
No, sir.
All right. Okay, let's go to we'll go to another page. All right. So now, so that's as far as for this semester, we'll talk about it only, without getting into too many details. We'll just quickly talk about open channel flow in this context. Okay. So now open channel flow, what I want to do now is to classify the different kinds of open channel flows, the classification. See, this is all very straightforward. So I'm just not going to spend a lot of time on this. Okay. So open channel flows are basically classified into maybe 3 or 4 different categories. One is in terms of time. Okay. So in terms of time, I have steady flow and unsteady flow. This you are all familiar with. What is the connotation of steady and unsteady? When I talk about open channel flow, if I say flow is steady, or if I say flow is unsteady, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Streamlines.
Streamlines. Okay, what about the streamlines? What do I mean when I say steady and unsteady?
Steady, I think streamlines will not intersect, whereas unsteady it will intersect.
Are you confusing it with laminar and turbulent?
Maybe, sir. I am sorry.
Okay, yeah. So basically, when I say steady and unsteady, okay, so this is something that I think we've discussed this before. Anybody? So let us say, yes.
Steady means it will not change with time.
What will not change with time?
Flow rate.
Flow rate, okay. So is that the only thing that will not change with time? If I have a channel of some given cross section, okay, then if the flow rate is not changing with time, what else will not change with time?
Velocity again.
Velocity won't change with time. The depth of flow will not change with time. Correct? So this is the simplest classification possible. That if let us say I have a river in which the depth of flow is 1 meter. Okay. And let us say I have a scale or a graduated scale on the bank of the river, on which the water level inside the river is being shown. Okay, I keep coming every half an hour to check the water level on that scale of the bank of the river. Okay, and I do this every half an hour for 10 days, and I find out that over these 10 days, that water level has not at all changed in that river. Okay, I'm just exaggerating. This is almost impossible to happen. But if I notice that the water level has not changed for the entire duration that I was checking, during that duration, I can safely say that the flow is steady, right? That it's not changing with time. Since the water level is not changing, the flow rate will also not change. Since the flow rate is not changing, the velocity will also not change, right? When I say velocity, I mean the average velocity of that entire cross section. Okay, so that is steady flow. If I say that, I measure it every half an hour and then I see some up and down. Right now, the water level is 1 meter. I come back in half an hour, it is 1.01 meter. I come back 1 hour later, it's 0.95 meter, whatever it is. Every half an hour, I keep checking it and the water level keeps changing. Then that would be unsteady flow, right? So this implies that the flow conditions or flow parameters, I'll say flow parameters. It could be parameters. It could be Q, it could be H, or sorry, flow depth. I'll not say H, flow depth, or it could be velocity, are not changing with time. So that means steady. And if it is changing with time, then that is unsteady. Unsteady otherwise. Right? So that is the simplest classification of open channel flow. Steady and unsteady. Now this is also similar to what we've done for pipe flow. Pipe flow also you can have steady flow and unsteady flow. So this is with respect to time. Okay. Then with respect to space, I have uniform flow and non-uniform, or sometimes it's also called varied flow. Okay. So now can anybody, given the context of time, when I say uniform in space, what does that mean? What does this mean? When I say it's uniform in space, what does that mean?
Area of cross section is constant
Area of cross section is constant.
of the channel.
Okay. Will the flow rate have to be uniform? Will the flow rate also not change in space?
It need not.
It need not. Okay.
It can change, but as you move along the streamline, it should be constant.
As you move along the, okay, let's
The
not say
velocity.
streamline. So uniform flow is basically, you can very simply say that the flow conditions, right, whether it is Q or depth or velocity, don't change along the channel, along the, okay. So when I say channel, I mean the open channel. Okay. Non-uniform means, of course, that these can vary along the channel. Okay. Now here in this particular semester or in this particular course, we will not consider, we are only going to look at steady flow flow in which the flow rate is not changing. Right? So I can still have non-uniform flow although the flow rate is not changing. You understand that? So this non-uniform flow, let us say if I have a channel in which the flow rate is the same, but the flow depth or the flow velocity are changing as a function of space. As I move from point 1 to point 2, the flow depth has changed, but the flow rate has not changed. Can you imagine that? It's possible, right? I can have constant flow rate, but flow depth changing along the channel. For multiple reasons it can happen. It can happen either because the cross-sectional area is changing or the slope of the channel is changing, right? Agreed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that is what this idea. So as far as this semester is concerned, we will assume that Q is not changing in time or space. Okay. The only things that are changing are the depth and the velocity as a function of space or as a function of time. Okay. All right. So even in this non-uniform flow, there are two categories. So non-uniform flow is called is divided into gradually varied flow, and you can, what could the other one be? Gradually. I've given you a hint, R. Okay, so it's rapidly varied flow. Okay, so I can have the flow depth changing in space. Okay, if it is changing gradually, okay. So when I say gradually, I mean, okay, I'll not introduce unnecessary concepts right now. We are almost at the end of the class. So the flow depth changes slowly. Okay. Okay, not slowly is the wrong word to use. changes gradually. That's the only way I can say it. Flow depth, sorry, flow depth changes rapidly. Okay, so I have these two kinds of non-uniform flow, which is gradually varied flow and rapidly varied flow. And as the very name suggests, gradually varied flow means the flow depth is changing as a function of space, but it is changing gradually. It is not changing rapidly. Okay, so these are the two other classifications of open channel flow. One is with respect to time, steady and unsteady. The other is with respect to space, uniform and non-uniform or varied flow. And again, under varied flow, there's two categories. One is gradually varied flow and the other is rapidly varied flow. Okay, there's also other classifications. I'll just quickly write those and then we'll stop for today. We're almost out of time. There's one more classification which could be in terms of Reynolds number, right? So Reynolds number, you all know this rho into V into D divided by mu. Okay. So now you know that rho is the density of the fluid, V is the velocity of the fluid, D is the diameter in the case of pipe flow. In the case of open channel flow, it will be some characteristic length. Okay. In the case of open channel flow, it will be some characteristic length. Okay. So this D is some characteristic length. We'll talk about that in the next class. Okay. Some characteristic length. Mu is of course the viscosity. So in terms of Reynolds number in open channel flow, if Reynolds number is less than 500, okay, I'll say approximately, it's not like a hard number, then this is called laminar flow. If it is greater than about, I think 12,500 or so, then that is called turbulent. And 500 to 12,500 is called the transitional regime. Okay, this is similar to what you've already encountered with pipe flow, except that the numbers are different. Okay, don't bother about remembering these numbers. Okay, in the case of pipe flow, I'm sure you may remember it by now. It's 2,300 for laminar and 4,000 for turbulent. In the case of pipe flow, sorry, in the case of channel flow, the numbers are a little bit different. Less than 500 for laminar and more than 12,500 for turbulent, and in between it's transitional. Okay, so these are the three different categories for channel flow, classifications for channel flow. We'll talk about one or two more classifications in the next lecture, where we'll meet on Friday, right? Okay, so any questions?
No, sir.
Anybody else?
No, sir.
All right, so thank you very much. Be safe. We'll meet on Friday. Okay, thank you. I'm going to end the class. All right, thank you very much.